All right, gang, today is all pain, all gain. And I should warn you, today, you're in for a world of hurt. We describe pain as the unpleasant sensory and emotional experience associated with actual or potential damage to tissue. And the thing about pain is, it hurts. It tells us that we're doing something that's bad for our body, and so it incentivizes us stopping doing that thing. So pain has clear, important survival functions. People who have a condition called congenital analgesia don't feel pain. So this can lead them to have damage from accidents or burns that they haven't noticed. But it can also lead to other problems as well. You may not regularly notice it, but pain also gives us subtle reminders all the time to adjust our posture, to shift in our seat, to not bite our tongue, to not come down hard on our ankles when we walk, and so forth. And people who have congenital analgesia suffer from a lot of mouth and joint related problems as well, not from having big major injuries, but from not having those subtle reminders about pain that help us correct something that we're doing. So despite the unpleasant experience of pain, its job is to protect us. And the fact that it hurts means that it does that job well. So thanks, pain. Nociception, or our sensation of pain, happens via these free nerve endings in the skin. You may recognize this diagram from when we talked about mechanical touch, but now we're going to be focusing on a different component of it. So these free nerve endings are nociceptors. We've talked about mechanical transduction by mechanoreceptors, those sensors in the skin that let us feel things like vibration and pressure. And we've talked about chemical transduction in gustation or olfaction. Pain, nociception, is another form of chemical transduction. But unlike olfaction and gustation, the chemicals that we transduce as part of nociception aren't external, right? It's not that there's some external stimulus that is coming into our body and we're sensing it. Rather, the chemical sense of pain is sensing chemicals that our body produces in response to damage. So when some kind of stimulus presses down hard enough on the body to cause some kind of damage, the damaged tissues release substances that are known collectively as inflammatory soup. It's a great name. Some of these are released immediately, that is, they're a byproduct of tissue damage, and some come from the skin's inflammatory response to the damage. The substances in inflammatory soup, shown here, bind to and depolarize nociceptors. The inflammatory soup also leads to what's called sensitization. That is, it makes the tissue more sensitive and reduces thresholds to other kinds of sensations. So this is why if you have an injury that's all swelled up, small pressure to it feels particularly painful. There are multiple different types of nociceptors that respond to tissue damage. These may be chemical substances like acid or temperature changes as well. One such nociceptor is called the TRPV1 receptor. That's short for Transient Receptor Potential Cation Channel Subfamily V Member 1. TRPV1 to its friends. TRPV1 receptors are spread throughout the body. We have them in our skin, in our corneas, that's the white part of our eyes, in our nasal cavities, in the fungiform papilla of our tongues, everywhere. And these receptors are activated by a host of different stimuli, including temperature changes, acids, and chemical irritants like wasabi and capsaicin, the ingredients responsible for making spicy food spicy. So when the temperature of a cell gets above about 109 degrees Fahrenheit, or there's a high concentration of H+ or acids, when those things contact the cell, or when capsaicin contacts the cell, they all lead to ion channels opening and the cell depolarizing. So we perceive all of those sensations as burning, despite the fact that they come from different sources. So hot peppers aren't actually hot, they're just acting on the same receptors that tell us that things are hot, so we experience them as hot. And the reaction that our bodies have to these chemical irritants is to try to get them out of our system, right? That's why our eyes water and we sweat, all in an effort to rid ourselves of this substance and cool ourselves down from the perceived heat. You may have noticed that if you eat spicy food and then eat something that is hot, temperature hot, it tends to seem like it's even hotter than usual. That's because the TRPV1 receptors are already active from the capsaicin. So those cells are already firing at fast rates, and the temperature now compounds that response and leads to even higher firing rates. Spicy food also gives us the impulse to drink something cold to alleviate the heat. But drinking cold water doesn't work to alleviate that spicy hot feeling. So you may have heard the recommendation to drink milk instead. Capsaicin is what's called a nonpolar substance, meaning that it does not have electrical poles. The electrons are distributed more equally throughout the molecule. Water, on the other hand, is polar. It has two opposite charges. Now, a general rule in chemistry states that like dissolves like, meaning that polar molecules will dissolve into other polar liquids, and nonpolar molecules will dissolve into nonpolar liquids. But a nonpolar substance like capsaicin will not dissolve in a polar substance like water. So when you drink water with capsaicin in your mouth, it's just like mixing oil and water. The water just spreads the capsaicin around your mouth, but it can't dissolve it. It can't get rid of it. So why does milk work better? Well, milk contains a fatty substance called casein, which is, you guessed it, nonpolar. That means that the capsaicin can dissolve in the milk and be washed down.
That's so cool. But wait, you said that wasabi and capsaicin both activate the TRPV1 receptor. But if that's the case, how come I feel the wasabi in my nose, but I feel the capsaicin on my tongue? And the capsaicin lasts forever, but the wasabi is so fast.
Oh, I'm so glad you asked. Yes, the TRPV1 receptor is affected by both capsaicin and wasabi, but yeah, the perceptual experience of wasabi feels very different from capsaicin. The reason for this is that wasabi is polar. It dissolves in water. So that means it can be airborne and travel up the back of your throat and into the nasal cavity, and therefore activate the TRPV1 receptors in your nose, which is why wasabi kind of sometimes feels like it's burning your nose. It also means that the burn from wasabi dissipates more quickly because wasabi dissolves in saliva. So the wasabi burn tends to be more transient and disappear more quickly than the capsaicin burn, which really sticks to your tongue and builds and builds. All right, one more amazing fact about the TRPV1 receptor. So I mentioned that this receptor typically responds to temperatures above about 109 degrees to indicate to us that those things are hot. But some substances can change or lower that threshold. So alcohol, for instance, lowers the threshold that the cell responds to about 93 degrees Fahrenheit, meaning that the cell will now fire, indicating a hot temperature, to any temperature above 93 degrees. So what's notable about 93 degrees? Well, it is that it is lower than the human body temperature. So that means when you take a shot, it isn't the alcohol that burns your throat, it's your own body heat. So that means, for those of you who are 21 and older, when you take a shot and you feel that burn, you can say, is this drink hot or is it just me? At this point in the lecture, people typically say something like, ooh, is that what explains beer blankets or beer jackets? You may have heard this phrase, which refers to the fact that alcohol makes you feel warmer. You can go outside when you're drinking and you don't feel as cold as you should. This actually occurs for a totally different mechanism than what we just talked about. It occurs because the alcohol makes your blood vessels dilate or expand, and that shifts blood flow to the surface of the skin. You now have more blood flow near the surface of the skin. And what else is near the surface of the skin? Your cutaneous receptors that sense temperature changes, thermoreceptors. So now you've got a whole bunch of warm blood flowing around near the receptors that sense for warmth. So you feel warm when you drink because your warmth is transferred to regions of the body where you can sense that warmth. You may even sweat more because your body feels like it's hotter and trying to cool itself off. However, the fact that you have more blood near the surface of the skin means that you lose heat more quickly. So not only does a beer blanket not actually make you warmer, it makes you more susceptible to losing body heat and therefore increases the risk of hypothermia. So here's a hot take. It's not a beer jacket, it's a beer tank top. Dress warm. Just as there are receptors such as TRPV1 that sense both heat and capsaicin, there's also a receptor called TRPM8 that responds to both cold temperatures and the presence of menthol, the cool sensation that's associated with mint. So just as both capsaicin and heat lead to similar sensations, so do coolness and mintiness. This is why if you brush your teeth with a minty toothpaste and then drink ice water, it feels like mind-numbingly cold. That's because those TRPM8 receptors are responding to both the menthol and the cool temperature. Pretty cool, right? All right, so once the signals from these nociceptors have been transduced, we need to get that information up to the brain. Have you ever noticed that when you stub your toe or put your hand under running water that's too hot, you get that immediate first wave of like sharp and intense pain, and then a moment later you feel that wave of slower, duller pain? Well, those two different hits of pain happen because of differences in the fibers that carry signals from the nociceptors up to the brain. So these are the C and A delta fibers that you read about. As a reference, the fibers that carry signals from mechanoreceptors, so these are the ones that we talked about last time for mechanical touch, those are what are called A beta fibers. These fibers are myelinated and large diameter, meaning that they carry information really quickly at about 100 meters per second. Signals about sharp pain are carried by those A delta fibers. Those are myelinated, but they're much narrower diameter, so the action potentials move more slowly. But they're still much faster than those slowpoke C fibers that carry the signals for that dull, aching pain. Those fibers are tiny and they're unmyelinated, so they carry signals about pain very slowly, at only about 1 meter per second. So when you have that late hit of pain when you stub your toe, it's because being just a couple meters tall means it takes longer between when the nociceptors are triggered and when the pain signals make it to your brain. So as a reference here, the C fibers, the information that travels through C fibers is slower than typical walking speed. You can walk faster than a C fiber transmits information. A delta fibers, though, are about as fast as an Olympic sprinter, but A beta fibers that carry the mechanoreceptor signals are super fast, over 200 miles an hour.
Wait, but pain is super important. You said so yourself. Doesn't that mean that the signal should travel really quickly?
One theory about this is that slow pain signals reflect something about the evolution of the senses. Pain was among the most important early things to sense, so it was the first to develop through really small and simple structures. More nuanced senses, like vibration and light touch, evolved later in larger and somewhat more complex structures. In addition, we can react to pain signals even before they've actually reached the brain. Automatic reflexes like withdrawing from pain are triggered in the spinal cord, and so that cuts down the distance that those slow pain signals actually have to travel. Now, I mentioned at the start of class that nociceptors are distributed throughout the body. We also have them inside our body, right? So you have a tummy ache, you have heartburn, those are internal nociceptors alerting you to something being amiss in your body. However, there are many fewer internal nociceptors than there are external nociceptors, and many of the internal nociceptors synapse in the same locations as external nociceptors. So pain signals that are generated in your heart synapse on the same neurons in the spinal cord as pain signals that originate from specific regions of the skin. This is called referred pain, when pain is perceived in a different location than where it is actually generated. The most famous example of this is pain from heart attacks being felt in the left arm rather than in the heart. This referred pain apparently occurs because multiple primary sensory neurons converge on a single track in the spinal cord. And the signals that the brain gets are the same for internal pain from the heart and external pain from the left arm. Referred pain is also what accounts for ice cream headaches. So when you eat ice cream, your mouth gets really cold. That causes rapid constriction of the blood vessels in the roof of your mouth, which leads to pressure in those blood vessels. And that pressure in the roof of the mouth ends up being coded as similar to head pain because information about your head and your blood vessels end up synapsing in the same location in the spinal cord. It's cold, right? Those pain signals then travel from the nociceptors to the dorsal horn of the spinal cord. They next relay in the thalamus and then head to S1, primary somatosensory cortex, for initial processing, and then on to the anterior cingulate cortex, or ACC, and the insula for affective evaluation. So pain clearly has like a sensory component, right? Like it hurts, but it also has an emotional component too. That emotional component, the kind of suffering element of pain, the sadness and the fear associated with pain, are what's coded primarily in ACC and in insula. So those regions are what's governing that like emotional response to pain. And we can see the emotional response to pain even in the absence of physical pain. So in one study, researchers asked romantic couples to have their brains scanned while they were either feeling physical pain themselves, so they were getting electrical shocks, mild electrical shocks, or they were watching their partner experience pain, seeing their partner get the electric shocks. The shocks were applied to the right wrist, and when the individuals received the shocks themselves, the researchers saw activity in the region of left primary somatosensory cortex associated with the right wrist. They also recorded activity in the ACC and the insula associated with emotional processing. But when the participants instead watched their partner get the shocks, researchers only saw activity in the affective regions associated with pain, but not the sensory ones, because they weren't literally feeling the pain. Interestingly, the researchers also measured people's empathy using the Empathic Concern Scale, which is a self-report measure about empathy. And participants who demonstrated higher empathy using that scale showed more anterior cingulate cortex activation while watching their partner in pain.
Ow, I stubbed my toe.
Oh, I feel your pain. Well, technically, I feel the affective components of your pain, but my nociceptors aren't responding, so I don't quite literally sense your pain.
Thanks, Professor. That makes me feel a lot better.
As you read, the old view of pain, how we used to think that pain processing occurred, was that activity in nociceptors was the only determinant of how much pain someone experienced. So as in, the more inflammatory soup there is, the more pain we feel. But as you read, there are many things that the direct pathway model of pain can't explain. There is not, for instance, a perfect correlation between the amount of nociceptor activity and our perception of pain. So according to this is another great example of how perception depends on so much more than just sensory input. Indeed, perhaps more than any other system, pain is a case in which sensation and perception are only weakly associated. A pain researcher named Jeffrey Mogul wrote, "The perception of pain bears a notoriously poor relationship to the intensity of the noxious stimulus." So we can have the perception of really terrible pain with relatively little nociceptor activity, or mild perception of pain even in the face of tremendous injury. And one of the ways that we can explain this is using the gate control theory of pain. So you got an introduction to this from the reading. The idea is that there is this intervening step between our sensation of pain and our perception of it. The basis of pain is still nociceptor activity, but the extent to which those signals reach and act on the brain can be moderated by other sources of activity in the dorsal horn of the spinal cord. So this includes the non-nociceptive activity from mechanoreceptors, as well as two sources of information from central control, that is the attention that we are paying to the painful stimulus and our expectations about it. So let's watch an animation that demonstrates how non-nociceptive activity can affect our perception of pain. So a painful stimulus is triggered and leads to nociceptive activity. But when that area of the skin is also stimulated mechanically, the mechanoreceptor activity acts to inhibit or gate activity from the nociceptors, meaning that those pain signals don't actually even get to the brain. This goes back to our discussion of EPSPs and IPSPs, right? Activity in mechanoreceptors are actually inhibiting the signals that are sent by the nociceptors. And as you read, things like moderating attention and the expectations that we have can also affect our perception of pain. Let's watch another video showing how distraction, that is diverting attention away from a potentially painful stimulus, can reduce the amount of pain that someone feels.
First Lieutenant Samuel Brown survived an attack on his Humvee in southern Afghanistan, but he would then have to endure rounds of surgery, skin grafts, and painful skin stretching.
This is a battle that's going to take years to get back to being how it was prior to this.
But while Brown's body fights that battle, virtual reality technology lets his brain enjoy hurling snowballs to the music of Paul Simon. University of Washington researchers Hunter Hoffman and David Patterson designed the virtual reality game Snow World to occupy burn patients' minds during painful wound cleaning or physical therapy.
Snow World's the opposite of fire. Snowy, cold. It's supposed to cancel out and help distract them from remembering their original injury.
Their previous research showed that not only do patients report less pain in Snow World, MRI scans show it reduces the brain's pain signals. Brown's doctors see real improvement.
What we saw was marked improvement in the range of motion that we were able to achieve, and most importantly, an increased level of comfort.
All right, and how can expectations affect the amount of pain that we perceive? This can happen in a couple of different ways. As one example, our expectations can reduce our experiences of pain. In one study, participants were told they were either getting a cream to relieve pain or a control cream rubbed on their arm. In fact, both creams didn't have any active pain-relieving ingredients, it was just Vaseline. The researchers then applied an unpleasant hot stimulus to the arm and measured activity in the dorsal horn of the spinal cord. The group that thought they were getting a cream with an active ingredient in it, the ones who thought they were getting some kind of treatment, reported less pain, showing a classic placebo effect, but they also showed less activity in the dorsal horn of the spinal cord. So what's striking about this is not just that placebos work, there's lots of evidence that suggests that, but in this case that they're working in the spinal cord. So those pain signals aren't even reaching the brain. They're being inhibited before they even get up to the brain. So if someone tells you that pain is all in your head, you can tell them that actually it's also substantially in their spinal cord. But our expectations can also enhance our experience of pain. So in one study, researchers trained participants in a training phase by pairing a moderate electrical shock with the visual presentation of a yellow square. So you feel a shock while you're looking at a yellow square. Or you feel a mild shock while looking at a blue triangle. Unsurprisingly, participants rated the more intense shocks as being more painful than the mild shocks. But then, here's the cool part. On the critical trials, they paired a mild shock with the visual that's associated with the more intense shock. They rated the pain as being more intense than just the electrical shock should have rendered it, right? It looked like the visual stimulus was affecting their expectations of the pain. Basically, they had learned the association between the amount of pain and the visual signal, and when they saw the yellow square, they expected a more painful stimulus, and that expectation affected their experience of pain. So the previous study demonstrates that expectations can reduce how much pain we experience. This indicates that expectations can also enhance that pain. So our perception of pain depends in part on nociceptor activity, but is also affected by non-nociceptive somatosensory activity and central control. All right, that's the end of this video. I know, it hurts. See you soon. All right, so you're going to feel the pressure first because those A beta fibers send signals faster than the A delta or the C. And you're going to feel the sensation of liquid first, again, because the A beta fibers are carrying that information more quickly. The idea here is that initial sharp pain alerts us to the pain-inducing stimuli, may help us get out of that situation, but that slow, dull, aching pain is still present to remind us not to, hit our injury against something else, and to encourage us to continue to maintain and take care of that area to avoid it hurting more. All right, so this may be because there is greater attention being paid to the stimulus, right? When you look at it, you're focusing on that area of the body and being more attentive to the pain signals. It might also heighten your expectations of pain based on how it looks, right? If you look down and see some huge wound, you're going to think to yourself, oh boy, that must be really painful. So Lucy has been told that kisses alleviate pain, so she has an expectation that the kiss is going to reduce the experience of pain, so it could act as a placebo. It also could be that the fuss that her loving mother makes may divert her attention away from the pain and toward, how charming her mom is. In addition, the pressure of the kiss may activate mechanoreceptors that inhibit the pain signals from reaching the brain. Note that in order for mechanoreceptor activity to reduce the experience of pain, it has to be not intensifying the pain. Right? If you have a wound and you poke it, yeah, there's mechanoreceptor activity there, but it's also going to be leading to an increase in nociceptive activity. All right, that's it for today. Let me know if you have any questions, and I hope at this point you are feeling no pain.